Today, I want to spend some time talking about the concept of justification by faith, what it means to be justified by faith. And what I'm going to do is I'm asking two questions to the text. What does that mean, and what does it do? What does it mean to be justified by faith, and why is it that that concept should affect everything about our lives? So I need you to do me a favor, look at the person next to you and say, you got to pay attention. Go ahead. And then I actually ask another question. Do you even know what justification is? Go ahead. All right, come back over here. Point number one. What does it mean to be justified? All right, so let's start with the context of the letter. So this is Paul writing to a group of Jews and people that come from the lineage of the family of Abraham and the family of David. And for some reason, these people came to the conclusion that because they were from the family of Abraham and the family of David, for some reason, they came to the conclusion that that's the reason why God was for them. And actually, they came to believe that because Abraham's obedience and David's obedience, they were not only righteous people, but the reason why God accepted them. The reason why God justified them means to be accepted by God or be righteousness, to be right with God. Somehow, this group of people thought that obedience can earn your salvation. That if you are good, you can then be justified. Now, if I were to use a formula, the way these people understood salvation was something like this. I plus obedience equals salvation. Or I plus righteousness equals justification. That was the formula. And Paul has to disagree with that because that is not what the Bible teaches. That is not what the history of Christianity has taught for years and years and centuries. Actually, Paul has a different formula. God accepts you because of your faith, and that makes you righteous. So what Paul is going to do for the next few minutes, in the next verses that we read, is he's going to explain why that's a different view, why there's a difference between salvation by works and salvation by faith. Why there's a difference between righteous in order for you to gain salvation, and what is it that justification does in order to make you righteous. Now, what Paul is going to do here, and I'm going to ask you to do, use your brains for a second, all right? So there's going to be a lot of material right at the beginning. And what Paul is going to do here is something brilliant. Because if these people are boasting and bragging about their lineage, and they're bragging and boasting about Abraham and David, Paul is going to use the same two people to contradict their beliefs. Actually, his argument is going to be that neither Abraham nor David believed the wrong view they believe. So let's start with the first one. Look at Paul using Abraham to correct their thinking. Everything starts in verse 3. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And Paul here is quoting Genesis chapter 15. And notice that the text says that Abraham was in fact a man of faith. Actually, we could say that to a certain degree, he was a good man. But actually, we have to say that he was not as good as they thought he was, because his faith, because his obedience did not guarantee his salvation. The text does not say that Abraham earned his salvation. And we know that that's the case because Paul is saying, and quoting Genesis 15, that the only reason why Abraham was righteous was because God counted him as righteous. Can you say the word counted? That's an important word, you know. Actually, let me explain what that means. And there's three different ways in which we can translate that word. In the original, the word can be, in the original is the word logisdomai. You don't need to remember that word. I'm just trying to impress you here a little bit. But that word appears 10 times in the same in one chapter, 10 times. And whenever you see that one word is repeated so many times, you really have to pay attention to it. So this is what this means. Translation number 1. To be counted means to be given something or to be declared something. It doesn't say that you gotta earn that status or you gotta work for that status. It's God simply, by grace, giving you something, declaring you as something. In this case, it is God giving righteousness or declaring righteousness. The second translation for that word, this is the translation for the NIV, is the word credited, meaning receiving a credit that you did not deserve. Receiving a credit that you did not work for. Since we got a bunch of college students, just think about this. Look at your bank account and for sure you're broke. And imagine that tomorrow you check into your bank account and there are $100 million. Right? You pay for your student loan and you pay for my student loan. And you know that you did not work for it. And you know that you didn't do anything to deserve it. It was just a credit. It was given to you. And Paul says that's what it means to be saved. That's what it means to become a Christian. You have been given a credit that you did not deserve. That the righteousness of a Christian is not something we earn or work for. It was given to us. It was counted. It was given as a credit. And then the last definition of that word is the word, a more like theological concept, is the word imputed, which is almost like a picture word that means dump on you. And it's a legal term. Actually, that word is a legal term. It says that by God's grace, because of our faith, God imputes on us righteousness, dumps on you righteousness, meaning that legally, if we have placed our faith in Jesus Christ, we are declared, we are given, we have been imputed with the righteousness of Jesus Christ. That we don't have to earn anything, that we don't need to work for anything, that is just a gift. It is given because of our faith. Martin Luther will call that passive righteousness. And it's passive because you don't do anything for it. You just believe. You just receive. Now, just in case you didn't get that, Paul is going to make it even more clear in verse 4. He's going to make a distinction between you working for something and you receiving something as a gift. Verse 4. Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. Look at what Paul is saying. If salvation is by works, if salvation is something you can earn, if salvation is something that you really, really get because you try hard, then that's not a gift. God owes you salvation. You purchase your salvation. To make you understand this a little better, think about allowance. Actually, the reason why I think about this is because, at one point, my wife and I decided to give our daughters allowance. But with the allowance, like good spiritual parents, right, we would say, well, we'll give you allowance, but you got to do your chores. Clean the room, clean my room, clean your bathroom, clean my bathroom, do all of that stuff. And then if you have it, I'll give you allowance. But one day, my little one, my second daughter, is having a conversation with her cousin. And the allowance conversation came up. And then somehow she realized that the concept of allowance and chores, they were not supposed to be together. Because allowance, by definition, has to be free. If she works for it, it's not allowance. It's work. It's salary. So she comes to me and said, Papi, why are you asking me to do stuff at home? I said, because I'm giving you allowance. And she says, you don't get it. You got to read your Bible. She didn't say that. She wouldn't be alive. But it's true. If salvation is by works, it cannot be by faith. If you earn your salvation, if you work for salvation, then God owes you something. He didn't give it to you for free. And Paul is saying that's impossible. That is not how God works. And this is what I've learned as we talk about these things, because this topic of justification always makes people so nervous. Because this is so good, so good that makes people nervous. And I've learned in all my years as a pastor, in all my years as a Christian, that even though people believe this theologically, actually, I dare to say that 90% of the people in this room right now believe in that concept, being saved by faith alone, theologically, but functionally, we live completely different. That theologically, you can embrace the concept, but functionally, we live completely different. And this is part of the reason why even as Christians today, we think that when we behave well, we are closer to God. Pastor Sergio mentioned a little bit about that last week if you were in this service, but this is the reason why when you do your chores, when you speak well, when you don't lose your temper, when you exercise self-control, when you give money, when you serve, you read the Bible, memorize, whatever you sing, you feel closer to God. And that's Monday and Tuesday. But then Wednesday, you really mess up. And for some reason, you feel far from God. Or that God is far from you. You know what that is? Salvation by works. Like if our relationship with God depends on our behavior. Like if to be declared righteous is something we work for. Paul says that's not how it is for believers. We are declared righteous because of our faith in who God is and what God did. Not because of what we do. So this is the other question. If you're struggling with that, you got to ask the question, okay, how good do I have to be in order to earn God's salvation? How good do you have to be? Because if you are good today, then you have salvation. But if you're not good tomorrow, then you lose your salvation. You know what kind of schizophrenic relationship we have with God? You know how much uncertainty that creates in the heart of a person. Like today, I'm certain because I'm at church preaching the gospel. I'm sure that I'm Christian. But tonight, when my patience is this big, and I'm exhausted, and let's say that I say just randomly, I say something wrong to my wife. What happened to my salvation? See, we don't get to create different categories of sin, So how good do you have to be in order for you to earn your salvation? Oh, let me make the case. Just grab one of the 10 commandments, just one. The first commandment. You shall not have any other gods before God. That's the first commandment. Actually, Martin Luther would say that if you don't know how to follow that one, you cannot follow any of the other commandments. So think about it for a second. We cannot and should have no other gods before God. That means that your family cannot be your God, your friends cannot be your God, your job cannot be your God, your body cannot be your God, your education cannot be your God, your sport cannot be your God, your ideas cannot be your God, your convictions or preferences cannot be your God. And if it's not your God, then why are you so miserable when you don't have those things? You see, this is the thing with idolatry. If you want to know what your idols are, look at the things you brag about. Look at the things you boast about and look at the things that take your joy away. I gotta have this. Because if I don't have it, then I'm nothing. There is your God. That is not what Christianity is. We are justified by faith alone. We are declared righteous because we have placed our faith in Jesus Christ. Look at what it says in verse 5. And to the one who does not work but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted, imputed righteousness, and counted as righteousness. Now, I love it when people say, well, Abraham was an amazing God, that's why. Of course he was an amazing God. You remember what he did in Genesis chapter 12? God told him to leave everything and he did. You remember when God called him to sacrifice his son? And he was willing to do it because he believed that God had the power to resurrect his son even from the dead. That's faith. But you do remember what Abraham did wrong? Just give you one. He gets in trouble with these kings, and he tells his wife, like a good, quote-unquote, godly man, hey, baby, just tell him that you're not my wife. I'll be okay, and God will take care of you. I don't care how godly you think you are. You say that stupid thing, man. You are not that godly. So it was impossible for Abraham to truly believe that he was declared righteous because of his obedience. Not only Paul is going to use Abraham as an example, as something to correct their beliefs, but now he's going to use David, because David was also a man worthy of admiration. I mean, he wrote most of the Psalms. He was committed to the Lord. Remember, David is the one that killed Goliath. Tiny little man killing Goliath. And people would say, that's why he's righteous. But look at how David talks about himself and everyone else. So verses 7 and 8, Paul is quoting Psalm 32, which is a psalm that David wrote. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. Notice that David is saying that God, in fact, forgives lawless deeds. That God covers people's sins. The question is, how is it that God does that? And the answer is at the bottom of verse 8. God does not count, the same word, their sin against them. Therefore, God counts people as righteous simply because of their faith. I love the way Daniel Doriani, which is a professor from Covenant Theological Seminary, he says this. With Abraham, we see that our good deeds cannot justify us. And with David, we can see that our misdeeds cannot condemn us. There's nothing you could do to earn the approval of God besides faith. And there's nothing you could do to lose the approval of God because of your faith. Let me say that again. There's nothing you can do to earn the forgiveness of God with your obedience. But you cannot lose his love and forgiveness and acceptance with your disobedience. If you have placed your faith in Jesus Christ, you are secure. Now, people get nervous with that. Actually, I guarantee you that a lot of you right now feel nervous about that. Because it's great news. So good that it's so hard to believe. So good that God would just accept us because of our faith that it's so hard to believe. Actually, I make the argument that part of the reason why it's so hard for us to believe this is because by nature, we are conditioned in thinking that we got to earn everything we are and everything we have. By nature. And because we are part of a society that says that you got to earn everything you are and everything you have. We are part of a world like that. But you have to remember that if you are a Christian, it's simply because you have placed your faith in Jesus Christ, and that's enough. Actually, the way someone is going to explain it is, you have done a transfer of trust. You have to stop trusting what you could do to trust what God already did in Jesus Christ. It's a transfer of trust. Stop trusting that you could earn your position before the Lord. And start trusting that what the Lord already did is enough. This good news is so good that I think many of us today, right now, actually don't believe it as much. Too good to be true. You want me to prove it to you? You got to say yes. Thank you. You asked for it, I'm going to give it to you. Let's say that you and I go for coffee or tea or whatever you like. And you have to pay because you made the invitation. So we go out for coffee. And I ask you this question, are you a Christian? And you say, yeah, of course, Hanibal, of course I'm a Christian. I say, are you going to make it to heaven? And you say, of course, Hanibal, I'm going to make it to heaven. And I ask why. Pay attention, church. I ask you, how do you know that you're going to make it to heaven? And you say this, I'm trying my best to be a good Christian. And I would say, you might not be a Christian just yet. That's salvation by works. Is you trusting that you're trying to be a good Christian. That is not trusting who God is and what God did already in Jesus Christ. Is you trusting yourself. So let's say, well, that's not how I'm going to answer. That's a wrong answer. I'm going to give you another answer. Well, I know that I'm a Christian because, and I know that I'm going to make it to heaven because I believe in God and I try to do His will. And I would say, you may not be a Christian just yet. Because believing in God is not enough. The devil believes in God. And you are trying to do His will? Doesn't that tell you that you're trusting your obedience? Trusting your behavior? And honestly, who is really doing the will of God 24/7? See, you still trust yourself way too much. And you would say, well, thanks God I'm not any of those guys. I have another answer. See, I think I'm going to make it to heaven because I believe in God with all my heart. And I would say, you may not be a Christian just yet. Because the object of your faith is not God. Is your faith. You are trusting how much you believe. Instead of trusting the one you're supposed to be believing in. Trusting yourself way too much. You know what a Christian would say? I believe that God is God. I believe that He sent His Son to die for my sins. I believe that He took my place at the cross. I believe that in Him I am forgiven. And I also believe that when He resurrected, I was justified. I was declared righteous. Therefore, I'm already in good terms with God. Regardless of what I do well or what I do wrong, my security before the Father is always there. There's nothing I could add to that or subtract from that. I have been justified. That's what it means to be a Christian. Yeah, give Him glory. You know, that idea comes from verses 24 and 25. He says that everything that Paul is talking about here in the Old Testament was not just for them, but it was for us. He says, but this was for us also. It will be counted to us who believe in Him who raised Him from the dead, Jesus our Lord. Verse 25, who was delivered up for our trespasses and raised up for our justification. Now the question we got to answer is this. How is that supposed to change everything about us? Question number 2. What does justification do? See, and part of the reason why I wanted to talk about that is because, once again, people hear this thing and it's so good and people start getting nervous. Hanibal, you actually give me permission, people, to sin. And I would say, if you take this as an opportunity to sin, you may not be a Christian. Actually, as we continue to work ourselves through the book of Romans, you will see that is never the attitude of a true believer. That if you really understand that you have been justified, the last thing you want to do is to offend the God of your salvation. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you 5 fruits of our justification. 5 fruits of our justification. And there's more, but at least from the text I pull 5. Number 1, If you have placed your faith in Jesus and you have been justified, declared righteous, that gives you freedom from the slavery of performance. So look at what it says in verse 2. For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. And the reason why I wanted to show you that is because that concept of boasting, as I mentioned before, is part of what we do in society. Actually, you're supposed to boast in order for you to be accepted. This culture says that you ought to boast, brag about something in order for you to be accepted. It's a performance. So everyone is boasting about things. So if you got a degree, you boast about the degree. If you got little letters before your title, I bet you use the letters before your title. Right? If you got a great job and a good title, you boast about that great job. If you got good grades, you boast about your good grades. If you got kids, I'm about to get personal, by the way. If you got kids that are doing well, I guarantee you that you boast about those kids. And there could be only two motives. One, really because you're proud of your kids. Or two, because when you brag about them, that's a reflection for you. Which, if that is true, you are using your kids to brag about yourself. Come on, if you're a parent, you know what that pressure looks like. How many of you guys ever felt the pressure that your kid's supposed to be something? Earn something, because if they look good, I look good. How many of you guys ever felt that? The rest of you guys are lying. You know, culturally speaking, there is a difference between majority culture and minority culture, you know? So if you're part of the majority culture, for the most part, you come to church and you leave your kids, leaving the service, and everyone's like, and the minorities are like, oh, wow, those are great kids. But then I come out of the service, and when my kids were little, both of my girls were little, they're running like crazy out there, and I feel this pressure. Please behave. And until the Lord confronted me and said, okay, how about if you let them be? You don't need to boast about your girls. You don't need to prove anything to anybody, church. We don't prove anything to anybody. We have been justified. You don't need to perform anything. You have been justified. If you are right with God, who cares if we're not right with everybody else? No need to perform. Yeah, give him glory. Justification also gives you freedom from the slavery of meritocracy. You ever heard that term before? It's actually a political term. It's a term that says that you got to earn something with your abilities and your talents. You got to merit something. You know how exhausting it is to live that way? Let me remind you what verse 4 says. It says that everything we are and everything we have is a gift. You don't need to earn anything from anybody. If you already have God, why do you need to earn anything from anybody else? It gives you the freedom from the slavery of meritocracy. Number 3, justification gives you freedom from the slavery of uncertainty. Listen up, church. If you have been justified, whatever God says He will do, He will do. If He already took care of your salvation, why wouldn't He take care of everything else? You know, it's interesting about this, and we didn't have the time to read all these verses, but Paul makes this explanation, talks about Abraham, and I think that when Paul is talking about Abraham in the way he did in chapter 4, is because he wants us to see that Abraham was just like one of us. You know, he knew that his salvation was by faith alone, that he has been justified and declared righteous. He knew all of that stuff, but somehow his tendency was to forget it. And God, in His mercy to help him, gave him what verse 11 calls a sign and a seal. And when he's talking about that, he's talking about the circumcision. Now, I'm not going to talk about circumcision because it's about to get super weird in here, but you know what that is. And you know why that was so important for Abraham. Because in moments of uncertainty, the only thing that he had to do is go to the bathroom. that he will remember that God had made a covenant with him, that nothing could take that covenant from him, that he had been declared righteous and nothing could change that, even if things are going wrong. All he had to do is go to the bathroom. Of course, we don't do that today. We got baptism, which is much better in my opinion. So if you have been baptized, that is your circumcision. Number 4, justification gives you freedom from the slavery of satisfaction. See, by nature, we all look for something that will make us feel satisfied, complete. But did you notice what David says in verses 7 and 8? Blessed is the one whose God has forgiven their sins. Blessed is the one whose sins are not counted against him. Did you know the word blessed there is not the typical word shalom that we find in other places? That word is satisfaction. And I think that it makes sense to me. If we are right with God, what can produce more joy than being right with God? If I am right with God, who cares what happens outside of us? And number 5, justification gives you freedom from the slavery of doubt. And we learn how to trust. Now, once again, we didn't get the chance to read all of this, but God makes this promise to Abraham when he's about 100 years old. And when Sarah is also elderly. You remember that promise? You're going to have a baby. That's a crazy promise. For a 100-year-old man, where everything stopped working, that's a crazy promise. And like any human being, Abraham struggles with this. But verse 18 says that he hoped against hope. That's a beautiful phrase. That even when he's struggling, he's hoping and hoping more and hoping more, even though he cannot see the promise just fulfilled. Can you imagine how awkward that conversation was with Sarah? This is what the Lord tells him, you're going to have a baby. What's your job? Pursue your wife. Pursue, by the way, your elderly wife. You know how awkward that had to be? This guy said, oh, you know, we got to do what we got to do. God made a promise. And she's like, come on, man, I'm exhausted. Like this nothing's going to happen. I got a headache. And we got to pray for that brother for sure. And he is really, in a very practical, real thing is we have to do what we have to do. Because God made a promise. And he's going to give us that baby. Have you ever thought of that in those terms? This is how we know that Abraham is an example of faith. Look at how verses 19, 20, and 21 describe his faith. His faith never got weak. He never stopped unbelieving. He was fully convinced. See, that is the effect of someone that has been justified. That is the effect of someone that is certain that you have been declared righteous. If God took care of my salvation, He will take care of everything else. If God says that He's going to do something, He is going to do something. So let me finish with this story. Now that I'm in Kenya, we go to this area, Turkana, which is where we actually have this partnership with Parklands Baptist Church and where we live, and then Wheaton Bible Church, and we all pitch in a little bit, and we do all this stuff. And before we got there, Pastor Kyle tells me, before we got there, he says, well, before you get there, I want you to imagine, I want you to have this picture in your mind that 7 to 8 years ago, there was nothing here. There was just this tribe with nothing else. There's actually this tribe and a borehole. That's it. So we get there and we could see what the Lord has been doing. Like there's a school, the kids are healthier. They got like a little plantation for vegetables. They could get water. All of these things is amazing to see. Of course, for someone like me that didn't see the original, this is amazing. But for those that have seen that there was nothing there, this is just beyond imagination. So one of our partners there that works for World Relief has been committed to that community forever, since the beginning. So at night we're debriefing our trip, and I'm having a conversation with him, and I say, can you share with me, how is it that you decided to be part of this? What moved you to be part of this? And he says, and I'm going to do this quick, that the first time he got there was 4 ladies inside that borehole. And it was 4 ladies standing on each other's shoulders, like 30 feet down. And one of those ladies was a pregnant lady. And he says that he saw this just to get a little bit of water, and that moved him. That changed his mind and his heart, and he decided to give himself for this group of people and everybody else around there. So he's sharing all of this, and as he's sharing, somebody else from the team says, you know that girl is here. He said, what girl? The girl that was inside the mother's womb. So they found the girl, and they took a picture of her with this worker. Now, I'm hearing this story, and I'm saying, that's what it means when God makes a promise. Even if it takes gradual, slow change in a community. When God says that he's going to do something, he's going to do something. And I got to see that girl. It's a reminder of the faithfulness of God. A God that says that if you are forgiven, you are forgiven. That if he says that you have been justified, you have been justified. That you cannot earn anything from him. That everything is by grace, and there's nothing you can lose if he has already given it to you. Because you are secure in him. Amen.